Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Divya Sridhar, Vice President for the Global Privacy Division. And today we're sitting down with Alex White, the current Data Privacy Commissioner of Bermuda and soon to be Privacy Commissioner of Queensland, as we discuss Bermuda's associate membership status in the Cross-Border Privacy Rules Program. We will touch more on what the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Program system is and how it has gained momentum with the official launch of its Global CBPR and PRP certifications in June of this year. Prior to launch, several countries submitted a letter of intent and became associate members to demonstrate their interest in becoming a participating economy and joining the global forum. So first off, welcome, Alex.
Thanks so much. Delighted to be speaking with you.
Excellent. So we'll touch a little bit on some of the motivating factors for Bermuda and what led the jurisdiction to pass its national privacy law and some of the inspiration for the current laws, especially as we see AI and data governance really be so active today. So first off, let's start there. Can you share what helped draw inspiration for Bermuda's privacy law? Maybe it was other existing privacy laws, or was there other factors involved with regard to the general economic climate in Bermuda?
Yeah, happy to do that. And with the caveat that I was not yet around when the law was actually being drafted. So I came to Bermuda to start up the office in 2020, and the law was actually drafted about 4 years prior to that. So a little bit of this is secondhand. But to give you the background, Bermuda does have a lot of inspiration from other existing privacy laws. And I think that's really natural. All modern data protection laws have this common kinship or descendancy, I've called it, from things like the OECD principles. And then you get a lot of cross-pollination. If one jurisdiction does something and it's a good idea, you see another regulator do it as well. Or in my opinion, you should see another regulator do it as well. And so PIPA, the Personal Information Protection Act here in Bermuda, was influenced by both the European data protection regulations, but also Canadian in terms of how it uses principles and a risk-based approach. So I call that kind of approach mid-Atlantic privacy, which I can dig into more. It's one of my favorite phrases because it's become the guiding philosophy of our office.
Excellent. Wow, that's definitely something I'll put a flag in for us to discuss further. So could you share a bit more about how your privacy laws incorporate AI? I know that you mentioned it was passed a while ago in terms of PIPA. And, is there a separate AI law that's maybe being considered, or are there aspects of AI that have already been incorporated into PIPA?
Yeah, at this time, there's not a separate AI law or regulation. But I don't see one as being necessary urgently. The reason why is our law is written to provide flexibility. Kind of like when I know you talk about operational things a lot. When an organization is creating their policies versus their procedures, you don't want your policies to get too specific, or otherwise you're going to be rewriting them all the time. And so similarly, PIPA is written at a pretty high level to give that kind of flexibility and, in my mind, make it resilient to changes in technology. So regardless of what specific pieces of technology you're using, are you being transparent in how you do it? Have you done a risk assessment? Have you implemented controls that are appropriate to the risk? So it has a lot of that kind of reasonableness language built into it. And so when we have a new technology on the scene like AI, there is space for it to be incorporated. Now, sometimes that can mean a little more work for regulators because we have to define what does reasonable mean in different circumstances. But it's good for the law, I think.
Excellent. And so touching more on the law itself and the priorities for Bermuda, could you share, and this could be shaped by, the geopolitical climate, the economic climate in Bermuda. Could you touch on sort of what the grounding factors are in the privacy law, and where should companies feel that there is the most priority around enforcement?
Yeah. So the way that an enforcement action might arise is in general in two ways. So first, we could receive a complaint from an individual or we could have our own investigation that we self-generate. And because complaints generally come from an individual who has gone through a process with an organization, who has perhaps done an access request, but then is not happy with how that request went. One thing I really emphasize for organizations is that if you want to try to avoid, regulatory issues, to think about this as customer service. If an individual is coming to you and they're making a request and they're satisfied with your response, then my office generally would never even hear about it. Another way to think about it is a phrase I like to use all the time is, people get so fixated on the Privacy Commissioner that was created by the law, but really we should think about it as it turned every individual into a Privacy Commissioner, because they can come to you and they can make a request and they can say, hey, how do you do this? How do you do that? And I really like personally putting that focus on the individuals. The second way for the second component to things, let's say we have reached out to an organization. We are asking for more information about what they're doing. I would tell them to proactively think through what they're doing, and after the fact, be able to show their work. So like I said a second ago, the Bermuda law says that they should behave reasonably under the circumstances. So when we're conducting an investigation, the first thing we would ask them is to say, why did you select one set of controls versus another? Why did you come, or how did you come to a certain decision? What were the factors that you weighed? And it's, reasonable minds can disagree. And so the regulator may come in and say, oh, we think you should have put more weight on this or that. But if you can show that due diligence, that's real, in my opinion, that's compliance. You're able to show that you've come to a reasonable conclusion. So there's not going to be punitive action. Maybe there'll be corrective action.
Excellent. So data subjects' rights requests, and then this proactive engagement on the business's part, that makes sense to be able to show a good faith effort to comply with the law. And all of that is a really good lead in for the Global Cross-Border Privacy Rules Program and the Bermuda's participation in that program. Before we get into that, I did say we would come back to was it the Mid-Atlantic Treaty? What was it called?
Mid-Atlantic Privacy.
Privacy. Yes. Please tell us more about sort of how that shapes Bermuda's culture, or maybe how Bermuda's culture has shaped Mid-Atlantic privacy and vice versa. So it'd be helpful to learn more.
Yeah, happy to do that. So there's this stereotype, and I do think it's a stereotype that, on the eastern side of the Atlantic, everyone's so concerned about privacy as a human rights issue. And we have to think about the fundamental human dignity. And then on the western side of the Atlantic, we've got to think about it as business practices and consumer rights, and how are we enabling the prosperity through the flow of information. And so what I'm trying to do with this Mid-Atlantic privacy philosophy is, first of all, to say we can't choose one or the other. We have to try to make both of these things work. And also that I don't think they are mutually exclusive. I think that the best way to protect individuals' fundamental rights is by convincing organizations that it makes business sense and to show them the return on investment. So I think that we can do both of these things. So that's how I got started on this Mid-Atlantic privacy kick. It's long been a fundamental part of Bermuda's identity to kind of have a foot in both worlds like that. So Bermuda is an overseas territory of the United Kingdom. For example, the final court of appeal for any decisions is the UK Privy Council. And even the European Convention on Human Rights applies to Bermuda. So Bermuda's territory under that. So it's from a legal perspective, very European. But the vast majority of the business that Bermuda does is with North America. And there's some incredibly important systemic financial data flows for things like, because the reinsurance industry, which is so big in Bermuda. For example, 90%, I believe the statistic is 90% of U.S. home mortgages are backed by reinsurance in Bermuda. Or, when a disaster happens and an entire town or region gets wiped out, the financial backing to rebuild comes from Bermuda. So it's not really practical for us to say, okay, we're just going to focus on one perspective or the other. We have to focus on both perspectives.
Wow. Okay. So we'll dig into that a little bit more, especially on the vendor due diligence side. I think it's very interesting to hear about the business model that backs a lot of the economy, I think, in Bermuda, based on what you're sharing. So let's dig in a little bit more on the Global CBPR program. I'll just provide a very in a nutshell version as to what it is, and then would love to learn more about Bermuda's interest and intent to participate. The Global CBPR program is a certification-based framework. It was created back in, I believe, in the early 2000s by a number of Eastern Hemisphere regulators, including the U.S. The U.S. did join a few years after that. And it encompasses many, many regions. So over 9 different jurisdictions. With the entrance and the creation of the emergence of a global CBPR framework, we moved away from this framework just being focused on the Asia Pacific region, and now it's opened up interest and expanded to a number of international regulators outside of that region participating. So it's very exciting to see that the global CBPR is kind of this 2.0 version of the APEX CBPR program. And it allows for there to be a way for independent accountability to operate and allows for companies to have a set of practices and principles checked by an independent accountability agent on behalf of the international regulator or the enforcing body on the privacy side. So that's sort of the in a nutshell version as to what the certification-based framework does. It's focused on data controllers. There's also the PRP component, which is specific to data processors. And so that's the high level here. But I would love to dig in a little bit on Bermuda and why Bermuda has taken interest in the global CBPR over the last year or so. I know there's been a lot of changes happening and rumblings around new countries showing interest in joining the CBPR now that it's gone global. So could you share a bit more about you all's interest and where that came from?
Yeah, of course. And I've been interested with the CBPRs for a long time. And it started from the Mid-Atlantic privacy conversations or the thought process that I was having, because I was thinking, okay, here in Bermuda, setting up a lot of these mechanisms for the first time, we need to have a systemic way to validate data transfers to North America. And so it's kind of the Asia Pacific was a bonus. But then I found out that the CBPR was becoming a global system. And so to me, it made perfect sense for Bermuda to get involved. So firstly, the CBPR is, in my opinion, it's similar to Bermuda's law in that it's that kind of flexible, resilient model that allows organizations to evaluate their risks and implement controls that are appropriate to that risk. So it makes that compliance mapping really easy for us. And secondly, I really like the accountability agent system. And I promise I'm not just saying that because of this interview, but just as a regulator, everyone has limited resources. We can only do so much. And so to have this system where we have this group of accountability agents that are out there doing compliance audits, spot checking, I joke semi-seriously that it's almost like we've deputized the private industry to go out and be evaluating compliance for us. So there's this incredible capacity benefit for regulators who are participating in the CAPE, the Cooperation Arrangement for Privacy Enforcement. So I think there's a lot of not only philosophical benefits, but kind of real world benefits as well. And it's very important because like a lot of laws, Bermuda's law also has the data flow kind of, we call it comparable jurisdictions, but in Europe they say adequacy assessments. And so organizations have to do that evaluation to say, is the recipient going to protect the information in the same way, which especially because the U.S. is such a fragmented legal environment right now, can be a burden on organizations to try to do that. So if we can use something like a certification as a shorthand to say, okay, here's an easy way to demonstrate equivalent protection. Yes, there's still vendor due diligence that has to happen, but it can be a very useful tool in that way. And like you said, now that there's this new set of standards as well, we can start to evaluate, okay, could this be even a functional compliance certification domestically? And that's something we're evaluating right now.
Yeah, that's excellent. And I'm glad you touched on that because as I was mentioning, the APAC CBPR was really built on 9 key principles around preventing harm, notice, collection limitation, uses of personal information, choice, security safeguards, so on and so forth. So there's 9 separate, overarching principles and then requirements that fall under each. The accountability agent on behalf of the government body would be doing the, checking the homework and that sort of internal audit process for each company. And then the end goal really for companies is to be able to demonstrate that accountability through the completion of certification, but also through a seal that they can then provide on their in a public facing format on their privacy policy in RFIs and other formats as allowed and permitted by the U.S. Department of Commerce. So I think with the global launch, what's also interesting and different from the APAC, even though the principles are really the same, is the unique and the uniform model of demonstrating compliance through the seal, the global CBPR seal that was created by the U.S. Department of Commerce. Really, the permissions are in their court, but it's wonderful to see that seal can be used to show accountability across the globe. And so a company that's a multinational all the way down to the smallest mom and pops can use this particular seal to, demonstrate that they're meeting all of the same requirements across all of these jurisdictions. So glad you mentioned that. I meant to share that right at the top. And so let's touch a little bit more into, let's talk about the businesses. And, you talked about the reinsurance model being a big one for Bermuda and Bermuda businesses. Could you give us a sense more as to where you see the benefits and the value to businesses, especially maybe on the B2B side, as you're mentioning, or perhaps there's other, specific industries that really benefit from Global CBPR in Bermuda that you think would see the value and could leverage this particular program?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in kind of the positive role of the regulator. And so when I think when we see organizations doing something right, we should be able to say, okay, here's an example of good practice. Here's something that we can draw on. And I'm also a big believer in incentives as well. And I really believe that in order to effectively regulate, yes, tool enforcement is a tool, but so is creating an incentive, creating the environment in which compliance can thrive. It should also be a key function of regulators. And so how can we reward compliance in that way? And the more that we can standardize, the more we can see return on investment, because we're not having to do a million different things in a million different ways. So whether that's one business sending a cybersecurity survey to another business, or whether it's talking to someone about their data storage practices, or whatever the case may be, having a standardized language for how to have those communications can shortcut a lot of problems, and even just shortcut the bandwidth that it takes to fill out all of these different surveys. And so having, a certification such as the CBPR can be really useful in that way. And then, it can become the basis for things like procurement practices, to say, okay, this can be a checkpoint for a procurement practice, or, even if we're doing an investigation with an organization, if they can hand us a standardized assessment that we have seen before, we have seen a template before, so we know what to expect, we know what it's supposed to look like, there's a value add for the regulator as well, where we can be more efficient in how we're doing our job.
Excellent. And that's actually very similar to a conversation we had with the Japanese regulators as well. And so they were sharing that a lot of the multinational companies right now, CHIPS is, in the news all the time with all of the AI growth. And the regulator was saying that it really streamlines the business process to have the CBPR seal and to have that, just that box checked for companies, because then they can go in to an RFI or RFP process and be able to put that on their resume, basically, to say that they've been able to streamline the process. They already have this and they've met the baseline requirements. So kind of a similar tone there that you just hit with regard to how regulators are viewing this. One other point, I think you kind of touched just the surface, you hit the surface of it. With regard to consumers and consumer complaints, another area which is lesser known for the CBPR and PRP program is that consumers can also complain to a redress mechanism that's built into the CBPR program. So consumer complaints arising from all over the world specific to data subjects' rights requests, notice data retention policies, and other issues that consumers are finding with a company's practices in line with the CBPR can then be addressed through a separate and independent dispute resolution mechanism. And so that's a very unique aspect of the CBPR, very similar to what it takes place with the DPF program as well with the EU-US Data Privacy Framework. But this built-in dispute resolution mechanism is very much a quieter aspect and also a quieter value add, I think, to companies. They find that it's easier to dish this out when a consumer complains about a practice that may be present with regard to their privacy policy or changes that need to be made with regard to data subjects' rights requests, and having an independent mechanism to operate that and be separate from the government also helps streamline and keeps the government bureaucratic process out of it, and will help expedite getting that complaint handled very quickly and in an easy manner. So what are your thoughts on the consumer side of it? What are some of the benefits, and anything you can touch on with regard to dispute resolution as well would be helpful.
Yeah, but, what you just described is another great example of the kind of bandwidth benefit for regulators, because, without a mechanism like that, the backstop is the individual would make the complaint to the regulator. And so then that means we have more cases that we're managing. And, maybe they're serious cases, maybe they're just minor cases or miscommunications. But that kind of capacity building is a huge benefit. And it means that individuals are getting their concerns addressed better, which should be the ultimate goal of every stakeholder involved in this process. And the second aspect of this, the second way of looking at it maybe, is that it's a constant struggle to try to make privacy issues simple for individuals to understand. When you read a privacy notice, oftentimes it at least feels like, even if it's not true, that you have to be a tech expert to really understand, okay, what is this actually doing? All I want to do is download this app, or all I want to do is use this service online. I don't need to know all of this stuff. I love to use the example when I go to the coffee shop. I don't start my order with the barista by saying, okay, first I would like you to tell me how you procured your espresso machine and how often you clean it. And, you just don't do all of that stuff. But in many ways in data privacy, we expect that to happen every time for every interaction. And it's a bit ridiculous. And what we need is a system in which we can trust what's happening, like the same way we have food standards or safety standards that are this kind of invisible regulation that we have in our society because it's been around and it's been tested for so long. So having things like trust marks are great examples of how we can make life easier. We can say, just look for this, and then you'll know X or you'll know Y or whatever the case may be.
100%. And I think the other aspect that's also, devised to create accountability in the marketplace, and consumers can see it, regulators can see it, other companies can see it, is this global CBPR compliance directory, which used to be the APEC compliance directory. Just for the audience who may not be aware, the compliance directory is a website housed by the regulators. I think Commerce controls, the U.S. Department of Commerce controls the U.S. Site, and this lists out every single company that's participating in the global CBPR, all the subsidiaries that are participating, when their certification was last completed, and when they're up for their next certification. So it's a great marker. It shows all of the information in one spot. It also demonstrates across the marketplace as to which companies are participating and who's kind of doing their due diligence. So I think it's another good faith effort and also evidence that companies are out there doing this. So we see, it's part of our program. We've got everybody from the largest, we've got the Mercks of the world, HP, Cisco, all the way down to much smaller vendors that you may or may not have heard of. I mean, obviously there's Okta and Moody's and some of these large vendors as well. But I think that's an exciting aspect of this program, is that these companies are not only coming to us to meet them head on with regard to their privacy practices and their challenges with meeting some of the requirements. Sometimes they don't have it all figured out on day one, and they got to work with their legal counsel to update their practices, update their policies so that they do meet the requirements, but also that they're willing to be listed. They're willing to put themselves out there and show regulators that we've done our homework and we're not scared to prove it. So I think that's another exciting aspect of the global CBPR that we are working on together with Commerce. So on that note, just a quick question for you all about Bermuda's take on promoting awareness for consumers as well as businesses, and what you guys are doing. Have you done any outreach already, or is that maybe underway with the business, maybe the Chamber of Commerce or other business organizations, and also with consumers with regard to both PIPA, but also maybe your participation in the CBPR?
Yes. So for PIPA, that has been that awareness raising effort has been the vast majority of our work over the last few years, because it was the very first data protection law here in Bermuda. So with Europeans, I joke, we're partying like it's 1995 or whatever the case may be, because we're at that point in time of people are just wappy for it around, okay, what is an access request? What is, what does it mean to evaluate privacy risk? Things like that. And so I'm really proud of one particular initiative we did, which is called the Road to PIPA. And that was a year-long effort where we basically told everyone because our act came into effect on January 1st. So the previous January, we told people, okay, we're going to, over the course of this next year, week by week, give you guidance on how to build a privacy program. And so I want you to follow along with us. Each week, here's a bite-sized step of what you can do. And so, don't wait until December, right before the act comes into effect. Let's get started right now. And so we had weekly guidance and blogs and community events, and saying, okay, this week just do this one easy step, and then next week this one easy step. Sometimes admittedly they were not so easy steps, but it was a really interesting time because the whole community was building a privacy program together, and all of that is still on our website. So if anyone's interested in seeing our resources, privacy.bm. www.privacy.bm is our website. So I always send people there. We've got a blog and social media and all of that good stuff. And every year we're picking a point of emphasis at what we want to talk about. And so 2025, we're going to be talking about children's privacy issues.
Great.
Oh, you'll be seeing more about that.
So just to wrap up, 2 pieces of bittersweet news. Alex. So first off, Backstreet Boys are finishing up their last tour here in the U.S. next weekend. And I also heard the news from you on LinkedIn about your departure from Bermuda's privacy office. Why don't you share a little bit more about, your next steps, your plans, and any ways in which the CBPR could be a part of your future journey in the Eastern Hemisphere?
Yeah, well, I would not say it's nearly as important as the recent Backstreet news. But yes, it is bittersweet. I am going to be leaving Bermuda, which was a difficult decision, but I'm really excited about the professional challenge and continuing to work on emerging tech and ethics issues in this new environment. But, like you said, and like we've talked about, there's so much that's universal about privacy and data protection. So one of the fun things as I've gone, I started my career in the US and I'm here in Bermuda and now going to Australia, is that there's so much in common as we go from place to place. And from a CBPR perspective, Australia is also a CBPR member country. So there is some carryover there. And I'm looking forward to seeing how I can continue to stay involved with those programs. But I just want to say very quickly how grateful I am for the people of Bermuda here who welcomed me, and it'll always have a special place for me.
That's so great to hear. Well, with that, we will wrap up. I want to say thank you again, Alex, for joining us today. We had a great conversation. It was wonderful to learn more about your current plans, all the past background and the developments that have come into play since your time in Bermuda. And also, we wish you a lot of future success in your new role. And want to also thank the audience for listening in today. So thank you all so much. I've taken copious notes, so hope to share everything with our audience, and we'll definitely be back in touch with our next in our series. So thanks again.
Thanks, Divya. Great to chat with you as always.